Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. The collection of 24 stories is given the framework of a pilgrimage made by 31 pilgrims from various backgrounds to Canterbury in the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. Some people would say it's better than anything Shakespeare ever wrote. A lot of people are saying this. Chaucer's set of tales offer the modern reader a wide range of genres, characters, as well as a diverse array of ideas, philosophies, and religious doctrines that give us insight into Chaucer's time during the 14th century. For this video, our group of expert Chaucerians will give an account of Chaucer's conception, development, and influences regarding fortune in his Canterbury Tales. We will delve into the Wheel of Fortune, not the game show, but actually something else entirely, and where it appears in the text, and how Chaucer's influences and own perceptions carry with it a development of the medieval concept of fortune throughout. Chaucer's depiction of fortune first appears in the first tale of the Canterbury Tales, The Knight's Tale. The Knight's Tale is a story about two knights, Arcite and Palamon, that are imprisoned by a wealthy lord, Theseus. During their imprisonment, the two knights have their attention captured by a young noblewoman named Emily living in the castle. Years later, after the two knights have escaped their imprisonment, Arcite and Palamon by chance meet each other again and are embroiled in a fighting match set up at the behest of Theseus. The two knights are planned to fight one another, with the victor taking Emily's hand in marriage. A pertinent part of the Knight's Tale that shouldn't be overlooked is the weight and importance Chaucer gives to his first tale. It is told by the Knight Pilgrim, a member of the nobility in medieval England, which sets the stage for a serious tale, giving Chaucer the setting to discuss serious philosophical topics of his time. Fortune is first referenced in the tale when Theseus comes upon a group of grieving ladies fleeing from their village that had just been attacked. One of the ladies says to him, "Lord, to whom fortune hath yeven victory and as a conqueror to live in." She then goes on to say, "Now be we captives, as it is well seen, thanked be fortune and her false wheel." Here we get our first reference to the goddess Fortune and her wheel. The medieval conception of the Wheel of Fortune has nothing to do with the game show, it's so weird, but rather an explanation into the capricious nature of fate and how it affects people. As time drags on, the wheel turns, and those once prosperous in power and wealth represented at the top fall to the bottom of the wheel, sitting in the pits of despair and destitution, and many times death. Fate is expanded on as the tale progresses. Before Arcite and Palamon's battle, they make appeals to different Roman gods. Arcite prays to Mars, the god of war, and Palamon prays to Venus, the goddess of love. The reader sees how this scene molds fate as the tale progresses towards its end. Arcite, having fought valiantly, wins his battle with Palamon, but in a freak accident, like something out of a cartoon, falls on his helmet and is fatally wounded. Palamon, surviving his fight with no freak accident injuries, is rewarded with Emily's love. Through this tale, we begin to see a conceptualization of fortune and how it affects Chaucer's characters. The two knights, once at a noble position in life, have fallen down the wheel to the state of grieving captives. But the two men are given a fated second chance, fleeing from prison, and eventually being given the chance to prove themselves in battle once more. While at the start, Arcite and Palamon are powerless and beholden to the whims of fortune, they are still able to sway the tides of fate by appealing to different pagan gods. These appeals completely affect their destinies. Could one's own fate and fortune be malleable in some way? In this tale, it seems so, but as we progress through Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, our guiding principle of fortune changes. In order to gain a good understanding of fortune as it appears and develops throughout the Canterbury Tales, it's important to acknowledge Chaucer's sources in his philosophical ideas. Where does Chaucer get this idea of the Wheel of Fortune originally from? How is it important to him? Thinking back to that first reference to the Wheel of Fortune in the Knight's Tale, we can see our trusty footnote making references to Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. Boethius was a Roman senator and philosopher living during the 5th and 6th century. While in prison towards the end of his life, he wrote his Consolation of Philosophy, which had a great influence over Chaucer. so much so that he translated the constellation into Middle English in a work known as the Boece. Before discussing the translation, let's turn to the constellation and see what it can tell us about fortune. Boethius's writing in his Constellation of Philosophy is a dialogue set between Lady Philosophy and a prisoner, similar to the same circumstances Boethius was in at the time of writing it. Book 2 discusses fortune's capricious and fickle nature. We can think back to the example of the Wheel of Fortune given in the Knight's Tale. Arcite and Palamon, once noble knights, are jailed in a tower, reducing them to the state of prisoner from their once lofty position in the world. In the text, Boethius writes, "Good fortune always seems to bring happiness, but deceives you with her smiles, whereas bad fortune is always truthful, because by change she shows her true fickleness. Good fortune deceives, but bad fortune enlightens." Boethius hits on fortune's power to enlighten us. While on one hand, she has a very capricious nature, changing at the whims of fate. Through her changing, she gives us knowledge. There's a very great friendship quote in here as well. It says, "So you are weeping over lost riches when you have really found the most precious of all riches, friends who are true friends." That's great. That's very cool. Very good stuff from Boethius. Now that we've considered the source material, let's turn our attention towards Chaucer's translation of Boethius and what it can illuminate about Chaucer's understandings and own personal beliefs. In Megan Merton's article, Boethius and Chaucer, The Constellations of Truth, she discusses Chaucer's translation and the subtle choices he makes. Chaucer displays a thoroughness and care in his translation, called the Boece, that shows his high regard for Boethius and his writing. The fundamental argument of Merton's article is that Chaucer, in his translation and his poem Truth, converges with recent revisionist readings of Boethius in finding the constellation's fundamental impulses to be more devotional than philosophical. Much of the constellation focuses on fortune and human happiness, but in the last part it discusses a look upwards, a look beyond, a look to the divine. Many scholars cite these last lines as a clear turn away from the philosophical and towards the devotional. This interconnecting of classic philosophical traditions and Christian devotion is of more significance to Chaucer, considering that he is a devout Christian. Merton argues that Chaucer heightens the biblical topics that surface in Boethius's Constellation of Philosophy. Chaucer's translation of the final line illuminates much of how he heightens this turn towards the devotion and looking upwards. Chaucer focuses on the deeds and works aspect, critical to life as a Christian. Chaucer's choice to use the word "deemeth" displays a concern with judgment, while the Latin word "cernuntis" connotes a word meaning to behold or see. Chaucer's Boece ends with a call to actively practice faith in a personal deity, which takes the form of virtuous living and the expectation of final judgment. So, like the constellation, Chaucer ends his translation with a turn to devotion, manifesting his Christian values completely in his translation, while remaining true and devoted to giving an accurate representation of his original source. So in the last chapter, we discussed Chaucer's main source on the theme of fortune. Fortune's fickle nature is clearly outlined in Boethius's Constellation, and we begin to see how it influences Chaucer in his storytelling. Now, in order to see the continued development, it is critical that we take a look at the tale in the Canterbury Tales that gives the most spotlight to fortune, that is, the Monk's Tale. The Monk's Tale begins after the host asks him to be merry and cheerful and tell a tale truly to the pilgrims. However, the monk has very different plans, telling the group he's got 100 tragedies that he's been dying to tell, stories in which protagonists are very much exposed to the whims of fortune and the downspin of the wheel. Fortune is a critical thread connecting all 17 tragedies. Tragedy is very much a genre built on the tragic fall of characters that were once mighty and noble, so it makes a great tale to peer further into Chaucer's depiction of fortune. The monk's first tragedy is a retelling of the story of Lucifer. Interestingly, the tragedy specifically states that fortune did not play a role in Lucifer's tragedy, as fortune can do no harm to an angel. When we get to the tragedy of Hercules, fortune does play a role in his downfall. The Hercules tragedy asks the user who can trust fortune, for fortune plays by its own set of rules. Jumping to Nero, the Nero tragedy explicitly personifies fortune, calling her a friend to Nero at first, who later turns on him and has a laugh at his expense. What was once friendship changes after Nero has his tutor Seneca killed. At that whim, fortune shows Nero who is the all-powerful in the line, for though that he was strong, yet was she stronger. Fortune is directly mentioned in most of the 17 tragedies, denoting her choices and whims as the paramount decider in the affairs of all humans. From Julius Caesar to Alexander the Great to Zenobia, fortune is referenced as the arbiter of their fate and what brings them to their demise. The three tragedies mentioned above, Lucifer, Hercules, and Nero, reveal a distinguishing factor among the monk's tragedies outlined in the article Chaucer's Development of Fortune in the Monk's Tale by Edward Sokola. Sokola argues that in the Monk's Tale, Chaucer makes positive alterations to his source material regarding fortune that forms a pattern throughout the tale. He distinguishes three groups to divide the tragedies in which fortune is not mentioned or doesn't play a role, the tragedies in which fortune appears as an abstraction, and the tragedies in which fortune is a personalized and individualized being. If we look at our previous examples, we can see how this plays out. Lucifer's tragedy is a part of the first group, as it makes it clear in the text that fortune does not affect angels, thus it is not responsible for Lucifer's fall. Hercules' tragedy falls into the second camp, as the text makes it clear that fortune has a hand in Hercules' demise, and that fortune does as it will, warning men to not be trusting of fortune as they can't know what will happen. Nero's tragedy is one where he has a good relationship with fortune, only for her to turn against Nero, for it is admonishable acts. It is a clear personalized relationship with fortune, even referring to fortune as Nero's friend. There begins to emerge a clear development of fortune localized in one tale of the Canterbury Tales. The first grouping is made up of protagonists unaware of fortune and the effect it is having on them. The second group of tragedies are one in which the fickle nature of fortune is realized and men are advised not to put their trust in fortune. The last grouping consists of protagonists who have a personalized relationship with fortune. This development has similarities to the consolation of philosophy discussed earlier. The prisoner, grieving in his cell, is visited by Lady Philosophy, who enlightens the prisoner on the true nature of fortune. At the end of the consolation, there is a look upwards that can be seen as making a personalized connection with the Christian God through devotion. While this development of fortune is specific to the Monk's Tale, in the broader context of the Canterbury Tales as a whole, sees a similar connection to the development within the consolation. Lastly, we wish to turn to the ending of the Canterbury Tales by mentioning the Parson's Tale and Chaucer's Retraction. In the article Placing Chaucer's Retraction for a Reception of Closure by Matthew Wolfe, Wolfe makes the argument that, quoting, by imagining any possible state of completion of the tales when Chaucer died, it is possible to defend almost any order found in any manuscript. End quote. The point that Wolfe is hitting on is that there is much debate about the order of the manuscript, and the existence of the retraction at the end brings up even more questions. Did Chaucer even write the retraction, and if so, why? While it is important to acknowledge the debate surrounding the order of the fragments to the tales, we believe that the ordering of the Elmsbury manuscript, the one we've been covering so far, lends the tales to a cohesive development of fortune, especially considering the ending. While other ordering of the fragments of the tales do exist, with the Ellesmere, it means Chaucer made a conscious decision to end with the Parson's Tale and the retraction. So why is this important? The Parson's Tale is a very different tale from the rest as a whole. It is a long treatise written in prose, written about penance, actions done in the Christian faith to repent for sins committed. The retraction takes the last bit of the tales to a very different place, where it's essentially Chaucer apologizing for the parts of his tales that were not worthy enough. It also makes many appeals to God, asking for forgiveness and the mercy of God for his mistakes. An interesting component to Chaucer's retraction is that he references his translation of the Consolation of Philosophy positively in the retraction, affirming the fact that he took great care in working with Boethius's writing. To see the development of fortune throughout the Canterbury Tales, we can look at our three nodes of interest: the Knight's Tale, the Monk's Tale, and the ending fragment, Parson's Tale and Retraction. With the Knight's Tale, Chaucer introduces fortune, but still separates the outcomes from pure fate by giving Arcite and Palamon agency in their prayers to the gods. The Monk's Tale reveals the harshness of fortune and her volatility, giving the reader 17 tragedies. Lastly, we have the Parson's Tale and Chaucer's Retraction, representing a call to penance and asking for forgiveness from the Lord. This development is similar to Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, with a grieving prisoner enlightened by Lady Philosophy, teaching the prisoner the hard truths of fortune, and then a look upwards and a devotion to a higher power at the very end.